All right. According to the Sustainable Development Goals that Uganda and the rest of the world are working towards achieving in 2030, Goal 3, which is good health and well-being, Goal 5, which is gender equality, and Goal 16, which is peace, justice, and security, can never be realized if we don't make an intentional effort to actually end this silent vice that is resulting into loss of so many productive young people's lives, but also older people, and most especially young women and girls. What exactly is missing out in the fight to end gender-based violence? That's a big question mark. Now, we do have ladies in studio with me to actually deliberate this matter. One of them is, of course, the Deputy Lord Mayor Doreen Nyanjura. You're most welcome.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure being on NTV, turning on our world.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
And next to the Deputy Lord Mayor is a beautiful lady who has a fancy name, and her name is Fancy. Good morning to you, Fancy. And can we have your full introductions, please?
My name is Fancy Sheila Aromorach. I am a Girl and Young Women's representative and a Girl Up Initiative Uganda.
You're most welcome.
Thank you.
Next to Fancy.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Kevin Presinabukalu. I work with Girl Up Initiative Uganda as the project officer of the She Leads program.
All right. You're most welcome, ladies. And don't worry that it's a ladies' platform, because at the end of the day, we have realized we must take these matters into our hands. Efforts to end violence against women and girls. We are in the 16 days of gender-based violence, and we must practice activism in order to send the message out there and get the right people to make the right decisions to protect the women and the girls, not just in Uganda, but across the world. So I'm going to ask these ladies to first give us a definitive understanding of gender-based violence from where you are as a woman, from the women that you're representing, the communities that you're coming from. I'll start with you, Kevin.
Yes, thank you so much. Gender-based violence is way beyond what we think, the physical violence. We believe gender-based violence starts when girls or young women and women are deprived of the right to participate in decision-making spaces at different levels, right from the homestead level to the global levels. For as long as women and girls are still receiving tokenism in participation, we believe that is already the starting line for gender-based violence. And gender-based violence can be in the different forms. It can be political, where society defines what kind of political positions a woman is supposed to take on, who is supposed to be what. And as we groom even our young girls, if they do something good, you will tell them, you're the next woman MP, not the MP, not the president. But that is political. It can be social. It can be economical. We always define who is supposed to do what. We want to define, even when we are defining the salary rates for female or males, we always hear statements like, she's just a woman, she's a girl, she doesn't need a lot of money. So then we have the political, we have the social, we have the economic. Yes, so we believe all these bring about gender-based violence. And the psychosocial is the overlapping, because we believe all that affects the holistic development of this young girl or the woman that we have or that we are seeing. Yes.
Okay. All right. Fancy, in your capacity, and of course this conversation basing a lot on young girls, we think that we have been born in a better era. Unfortunately for us, that's not the reality when it comes to gender-based violence. So where do you stand on that?
I think I wouldn't, go off from what Kevin just mentioned. any form of violence will definitely cause harm, suffering, pain, and this can be done privately or publicly. And you find the effects are not only short-term, but of course long-term. And just as for us girls and young women, we have come to acknowledge, just like Kevin said, that gender-based violence will start from you not having me on this panel. If that had happened, that would be a form of violence for me as a young person, because hey, this is a conversation that I must be a part of. It's a conversation that I contribute to, because I, for a long time, for decades, continue to face forms of violence at school, in my community, household, you know, domestic setting. And yeah, so for us, gender-based violence could come in from that perspective.
Okay.
Yes.
We do have a political leader now. Kevin, you did make the point of gender-based violence in politics. Madam Nyajura, in regards to that element, and with your many years in politics, what does gender-based violence look like?
Well, of course, society has set its own standards of how, if you're a woman, how you're supposed to behave, how you're supposed to dress, how you're supposed to look like if you're going to contest and win an election. And of course, these are things that we suffer on a daily basis. Someone will tell you, but Nyandra, you're not responsible because you're not married, you know. And I mean, it's funny because responsibility has nothing to do with being married, you know. I remember I was challenging one of my opponents. I said, yes, I'm not married, but I do so many things. I don't depend on anyone, and like you. So it got that personal. And of course, you have to be having a thick skin for you to overcome all that. Yeah. Well, I have suffered these things, and I've told people that initially I didn't, it was never my intention to be a feminist. I didn't even know what that was all about, but most of the times when you stand up for your rights, you're tagged as a feminist. I don't know, there are some people who believe I'm not even a woman, you know, because there are things that I personally do not believe in. And honestly speaking, that is where the whole essence of gender violence, you know, starts from.
And so what are those things over this experience that you now started believing in and advocating for?
For example, well, really, some things are so petty, you know. They'll tell you now, you know, you are the deputy Lord Mayor, you're not supposed to, maybe you make sure you have your hair long. Some of these things are really, really minor. They'll talk about your dress code and all that. So, but you have to keep moving, and you know, and thanks to Girl Up Initiative, these are conversations that we need to have with young girls, that it's not about how you dress, it's not about the background where you come from, you know. It's possible you can also sit on the table. Yes, and you have to be deliberate, you know. We have to train girls from a very tender age, you know, that it's okay. It's okay, you can compete with the boys, you know. You don't have to, and you know, this thing, by the way, is deep.
You can compete with a fellow human.
Okay, you can compete with a fellow human.
Because again, that's the element of gender.
This thing is a bit...
You're both human beings.
Okay, this thing is a bit deep. Definitely, it goes beyond individuals, because as a family, you might try your level best. But trust me, when you go to school, your child will be told something different. And I've had some controversial conversations, you know, that our education system has not changed for so long, that up to now, when a kid goes to school, they still tell them the head of the family is the father. And I'm asking, you have families where the father does not even know where the fees has come from. The father does not even know what the kids have eaten, you know. So does putting on a trouser qualify someone to be the head of the family? So as a family might do what it is supposed to do, but the child would go to school. Then we have all these, we have the culture, you know, the culture that is embedded within how the girls are raised, you know. You find for you, the girl, they are telling you you're supposed to be cooking. And I've been making an argument. Cooking is a skill that everyone should have. It is not written anywhere
after all,
it
men
should
cook
be
better.
Exactly. After all, men cook better. It is not a skill, you know, that is specifically there for girls. Girls are not born with these skills.
And that stems from culture. Now,
exactly, that stems from culture. you'll go to religion, you also find that they're training girls in a different way, and they're going to be stuck on that religion. As a woman, you're supposed to be subordinate. So that means the other sex is going to continue viewing girls as a weaker sex. So some of those things are the ones that, honestly speaking, lead to violence.
Fancy, in your journey and in your opening statements, you did talk about the effects of gender-based violence. What are some of those effects that you have directly interacted with under the initiative?
I think I would love to start off from this particular perspective. It's a question I normally ask stakeholders. What's a conversation that is meaningful, a conversation that is inclusive, a conversation that has a sustainable impact without a girl or young woman or a woman in general. And so when we are to look, or when we are to ask ourselves that particular question, then we are working towards not having effects of violence at the end of the day. But some of the effects of violence we continue to face, or I have faced as a young woman, a girl, young woman, have been around trauma, distress, which are more or less long term. But also other girls and young women continue to face, it could be, a form of disability, partial or otherwise, which could have stemmed from a physical violence. Also issues of opportunity, loss of opportunity and spaces, privileges, amongst other things. And you find these effects not only affect the girl and young woman right now, but the community she's going to be in. They're going to affect the country we are trying to be a part of, development, because we are very much of a belief that as girls and young women, we hold responsibility and are accountable to societal development, or, the development of our country where we are. And so if these effects, are happening, or we are experiencing these effects right now, then what are we looking at 10 years from now for the country? Yeah.
All right. Kevin, what are the enabling environments in the 21st century for gender-based violence of women in Uganda?
Enabling. Well, I would say, one, there are referral pathways, but the knowledge about those referral pathways to the communities out there, to the girls out there, to the women out there, the knowledge is so limited and so scattered. So the government is trying to put referral pathways, but then it is not sensitizing people about these pathways. There are different laws that are being put in place, but then still the communities are not aware. Even the implementers, for example, the police, will not be aware. If we have our leaders, so many of our leaders are the perpetrators of those laws, but they are not aware that they are carrying out a form of violence against this person. For them, they feel that is okay, and it is the way it is supposed to be. So there is a step that the government is trying to take, but it is living in the shadows. No one knows about these steps. So if you look at what we are trying to do as SHEDID's program, we are trying to create awareness about these different referral pathways. We are working with our leaders. We are working with whoever is ready to support, to see that the young people becomes those people that can reach out to the rest of the world, to let them know about these different referral pathways. But then, of course, sometimes you look at it as a political move. You're saying the laws are there, it exists, but then when it comes, for example, to budgeting, are we having appropriate resources for handling or for addressing issues of gender-based violence? If we are not allocating enough resources, appropriate resources for this, how do we expect to have it achieved? Okay. You talked of SDGs 3, 5, and 16. How if we have 6 years to go to meet these goals, and then we are not doing anything, and even the ones who are supposed to be doing a thing seem not to be knowing that it is their role to protect against all forms of violence. Yes.
Okay, well, that sort of sounds like a critique for me, Madam Najera. It's a critique for its underfunding, government's underfunding of programs or laws, for that matter, to be implemented. And this is in response to GBV, which we have seen even the highest levels of office. So as one that is an advocate under feminism in that matter, and in the KCCA structure, how exactly is this being handled?
Well,
but also, is it a false accusation?
Well, it's not a false accusation because actually, when it comes to KCCA, there are no specific allocations made to GBV. And probably, as you might be aware, we are working on the gender-based violence ordinance, which is still in the pipeline, you know. But even getting funds, you have to scatter around, look for different NGOs. So it has never been a priority of this government. And for me, honestly speaking, I think it is deliberate. But also the people that do allocations, yes, we are here, we are saying we have so many senior leaders probably in positions of influence. But do they know what GBV is? Are they sensitized, you know? You might find they're equally ignorant, and I'm not. I don't want to. It's not that I'm abusing them, but that is a reality. I told you here that I didn't. You know, I didn't know that at some point I was going to be called a feminist. You know, and I just started advocating recently. Yeah. And I've actually told people my campaign slogan in 2021 was championing the common man's cause. And now that is something that I am so ashamed about, you know. What of the women? You know, but it's because, like I have told you, this starts from a very tender age. They will tell you that when you talk about men, it also involves the women. That you also fall there.
Speaking about the ordinance, who stands to gain from this delay?
Who stands to gain? Probably those that support gender-based violence stand to gain, because we shall continue practicing what we are practicing, and we shall not have any law in place to, of course there are laws at the national level, but I think it would be a very huge contribution for us as local leaders to add on that brick. And of course that is my docket at KCCA, and we've been trying to reach out to different NGOs, and we've been able to at least hold some stakeholder engagements with some of the residents in Kampala. Now that process is detailed, definitely. When you come up with a draft, it has to go to the Attorney General, then it has to come back. But I mean, there's very limited political. So there's very limited political will, and this was not an initiative, by the way, of government. It was an initiative of NGOs that approached different political parties, that approached different local councils, and they said, you know, your positions exactly that you need to come up with you need to come up with an ordinance. However, I've always made a point.
Could it be the reason as to why it's also being given a continuous backseat and the files being put under the table?
Oh yeah, that is exactly it. But you know, I've always made this argument: do we really need a law for us to tell us that girls, women are also human beings, and therefore they're supposed to be respected? For me, I think some things should just be natural and should just be obvious, you know, that if there's a woman, if there's a girl, she also needs to have her rights respected. And of course, like I have always emphasized, for me as a woman, I've always told my fellow women that there is nothing that as women have gotten on a silver plate. Even coming here to sit on this panel, you know what it took. Us contesting and becoming leaders, there was an effort. Us eating certain types of food, there was an effort. So I think as women, the continuous engagements that we are having, us having these conversations, is very important. And eventually, even those that do not appreciate the need of the conversations that we are having, are definitely going to appreciate that need.
I'm glad
those that are in power
represented here.
If you have not yet faced
in response to what she has submitted, perhaps the reason as to why it's not getting the necessary immediate attention, the ordinance, is because of where it's coming from. And yet I trust that it's being fronted from a good place, because NGOs have the privilege of doing grassroots engagement and seeing the realities on the ground, and then causing light, and then pushing or advocating for that to be changed. So in regards to that, and let me twist it a little bit, isn't it very important then to have men part of this conversation in fighting against gender-based violence?
Yes, I would say it would really be very important if, for example, the platform was enabling to have a male representative on this platform, because for us at Gallup Initiative Uganda and as the She Leads Consortium in Uganda, we so believe in the power of engaging all stakeholders, including men and boys, in these engagements, because we believe if we are looking or dreaming of that world where women and girls are given equal opportunities and equal everything in this world, we believe that men have to be part of our conversation, because it is those boys that are going to fight for their sisters. It is the boys that will initiate the conversations with their daughters, with their nieces. So we believe the men have a role to play, just as Doreen said, we have leaders that really don't understand about the issues of gender-based violence. They believe that's how it's supposed to be. And for them, they believe if they are defining a woman, for them that's what they've grown up knowing. So we are engaging boys and men at all levels and in all our different programs. And actually not only boys and men, we engage with community leaders, the religious leaders, because we believe these are the opinion leaders of our communities. Then we engage the media. So many times when I'm having discussions with the media, I always challenge them that you always come out to look for us during International Day of the Girl. When you're having conversations during, for example, 16 days of activism, that period of the campaign, then maybe Women's Day. What happens when you're discussing economics of the country? You get a panel full of men and maybe one woman or none. And for you, you think you're doing us justice. And for you, you're thinking that the only thing I can talk about, or Doreen can talk about, issues around women. Don't you think we are equally responsible and accountable to the economics of this country? What happens when you are discussing issues of health? We shall, when do we bring in...
What happens when we are discussing issues of corruption?
When we are discussing issues of corruption, why is it that we are not having young people, we are not having women on such panels? But when we are having an International Day of the Girl, that's when they are reaching out. Everyone is reaching out to you and they want to get a story. Okay. But when they want a broader view of the affairs of the country, they will go for the male.
So therefore, Fancy, how do we move forward and create a violent-free society?
I think we need to redefine what conversations mean, meaningful conversations. That could be the first step, because then we get to appreciate who is a part of a meaningful conversation and not a mere conversation. If we are to come from that perspective, then hey, yeah, we'll definitely see girls and young women a part of spaces, a part of decision-making processes, but also we need to be much specific in how we address issues, how we channel resources, how we engage in with particular stakeholders. And I think for me, that could come out as an ask to three particular elements, and I think the very first one is to one of the She Leads domains that we are working around, and that is a social norm domain, and media is a part of it. You know, the world is really moving fast ahead, and of course media is like our mother truth at the moment. We look up to media for anything, but then if media decides to lay back and put limitations for us to be a part of conversations, for us to engage, for them to be welcoming to us and not be discriminatory, then we are moving towards the right direction. And so that for me, a call to media would be, hey, can we twist in how we engage society? Can we be more inclusive in how we engage society? Can we be more welcoming and listening to girls? Can we air stories that are uplifting? I was reading the Monitor today morning, and there is one of a very sad articles around child marriage, and as a country we still stand at 16th out of 25 countries faced by child marriage. So, and I thought you were going to read that, a part of the press brief.
No,
and
I'm holding it as the last conversation, because that's the kind of worms that you're opening up there.
Yes. So can we have more of those? Can people get more aware? Can media take it upon themselves and us not having only political conversations running across, but conversations around everything? Because we are part of everything. We do not only intend to want to listen politics. We are part of a civic space, and so civic space is broad. Yes. Another call for me would be to young people, girls and young women, or even young men, is we hold a great mantle towards this common cause on ending gender-based violence or gender violence. And so if we cannot take advantage of the resources within our means, if you are in the sports arena, if you are in academia, if you are in medical space, if you're in a political space, what have you done in that space? What are you doing in that space? And for us, that falls under civil society domain. That civil society is able to mentor us in our different unique spaces and abilities. So can that not be a conversation that waits for a budget, mentorship of young people waiting for a budget, but can it be much more intentional and know that it is part of your programming, our civil society space for us young people in our different spaces? Lastly, is to the institutional domain, which for me is, for us is policy makers, different global agencies, during I don't even know why I went far. I should have said it. Is, I believe, having a gender lens to having issues addressed is the way to go. We cannot be talking gender budgeting and lay back and say, you know what, I think that only will happen when we are waiting for international days. And let's think about the symposium of girls when that comes. Can we look at things from a gender perspective? Because then the lens will not be limited. There'll be different perspectives, different views will come up from girls and young women living with disability, from refugees, from children, from older people, and I think that should be something that should be clearly addressed. But also, we have continued to call every single year. We wait during June, July, that period when budgeting is happening, consultations are happening, and we are waiting for that moment when we will definitely hear, oh my goodness, this amount of money has actually been allocated directly to a project on ending gender-based violence. That remains a very tough call and a very tough thing we continue to wait for, but it has failed to come up to light. And I think that should be something we work towards, even as we are drawing closer to the 2030 agenda. Yeah.
Thank you, Fancy. And let's not lose hope in that direction. There's hope. And by hope, I mean, I trust that government, in one way or another, is is trying. We cannot negate the fact that it is honestly trying. The president is trying to bridge the gender gap in terms of representation. Yes, you have alluded to the woman MP. Why can't it just be MP? But you see, those are few steps, but we must recognize and appreciate that they are pushing us in the right direction. However, it's not enough. We do acknowledge that it's not enough. So, Doreen.
Just wanted to briefly talk about that whole issue of a representation. Honestly speaking, this is an argument that we have had over time. This whole essence of saying we're empowering women, we are giving them seats. It doesn't add up, because, I mean, you're talking about women who are not economically empowered. We are talking about women with all the historical injustices, but you find the constituencies that are created for the women, they're so large, you know. And yet when you go to these smaller constituencies, the direct seats, they will tell you those are seats that are reserved for the men. At least that is what communities, that is what society, that is even what some women believe. And we have been advocating for 50-50 women, 50-50 representation. Let each district have a male and a female. Then that we can compete. But this whole essence of saying you're empowering women, and yet my constituency,
then others are going to come and argue here on my show tomorrow and tell me that no, the numbers that we have in parliament already are far and beyond.
Oh, okay, that's what I'm saying. Actually, this
if we're going to go that direction,
this will actually reduce the numbers.
1,000 parliamentarians.
No. It will reduce the numbers, because if you look at a district, how many seats are there? You find there are like 6 constituencies. So we are saying let each district have 1 man, 1 woman. So it will actually reduce the numbers. The numbers are not going to be big. So for me, that is the whole essence of empowerment. You cannot tell me you're empowering me. You know I don't have money, and yet my constituency is way beyond it is big. So that is a debate that we should really have. If we are talking about equity, if we are talking about equality, it should be 50-50. When it comes to cabinet, let it be 50-50. Because for me, it does not make sense saying that we are considering the women. Then you have 3 women and you have 15 men. And they tell, this government is really doing well. This government is fighting for the rights of women. No. Okay. If you're fighting, if you're talking about equity, if you're talking about equality, let it be 50-50. That is the way to go, and that will actually make sense.
All right. Fancy made mention of the early child marriages. It's a conversation that's been in my heart in regards to culture as a whole, and how it honestly is one of the unspoken contributors. No one wants to talk about it because of how core it is in our society, and yet it is one of the enabling environments of gender-based violence. And I would like to pick your minds, each one of you, about dowry price. In relation to gender-based violence.
Yes, of course, you can see there is a shift now, especially for a few parents that are realizing how dowry price do contribute to their daughters being looked at as assets for some individual who went and paid their dowry. And they are changing it to, no, it's okay, you just come, we'll see you and go to church. Make a family. I'm thinking, yes, I do believe in culture, some culture norms. For example, if it is dowry that is affordable to the person you're asking that dowry from. But if you want someone, these days there was a time when parents would ask the boys to bring things they've never owned, even their family. That's what they're asking for. You ask for those so many cows, you know this boy is coming from a family which you
see, you can't determine what's reasonable, because everyone has a different state of reasonability. So let me have Fancy. Dowry price, you being given unto another at an exchange.
Me getting married or engaging in marriage, not being given. So I really think culture is a dynamic concept. And so when culture is taken as something, you know, static and something that is of a disadvantage to a particular group of people, then that culture is inhuman and shouldn't be practiced. But then if honest conversations are happening between these two families, especially if those families are not marrying off young people, if they are adults and ready to get married, then that's okay. If that's an honest conversations and minds have, you know, come together, then that should work out. But if it's for someone who is a young person and they're not ready, then we should not even
But you yourself, having read the, you know, the article, the interaction thereof, really these girls' children are being given off to marriage simply because these parents want something to continue sustainability of their families.
And maybe just to add on that, the annoying bit is when you follow up on some of those cases, it's not that the family is a needy family, but they're just greedy.
Well, for me, I'll honestly speaking give my honest opinion. I do not believe in this whole thing of bride praise, dowry. I mean, these are issues of the heart. Why should anyone pay, you know, in order for them to start up a family and then give birth to children? So it does not make sense to me. We shouldn't be having bride price, we shouldn't be having dowry, because at the end of the day, it is a burden, by the way, for crying out loud. On top of it, making women look at being treated as slaves. For me, I think it is outdated, and that is a culture that we need to do away with.
Okay.
She has already told you culture is not static, culture is dynamic, and culture is man-made, mark my word, man-made. So that means, you know, there are some things that need to change. And this whole thing of trying to teach young girls that, you know, marriage is a very big achievement and all the focus is on that, I really find that very wrong. We should encourage our girls to also focus on other things.
Okay.
When you become of age, no one is asking you, no one is telling you, you're too old, why can't you find work? Everyone is telling you, you're too old, why don't you get married? So we just need to change the conversations. And I think this is going to, it has to be a deliberate effort.
That is true. Closing remarks, a minute for each of you. I'll start with you, Kevin. Efforts to end violence against women and girls.
Yes, I would cluster my call to three different stakeholders, and I will start with where I come from, the civil society community or fraternity. I do call upon everyone to make sure that in our programming we do allocate appropriate resources to cater or to address issues of gender-based violence. And then to the government, of course, we've talked about budgeting, and then awareness to the state actors to know issues of gender-based violence. And then to the young people, it should be each and everyone's responsibility to look out for those fail young people, and then adults to make sure that everyone knows the referral pathways and they know they can recognize that this is gender-based violence.
Okay. The young lady in the room, Fancy, your word to the young girls and women out there.
Okay, so I want to start from a point of gratitude for all efforts from different stakeholders that are towards ending gender-based violence, civil society, even as young people, but also institutional spaces that are working towards ending gender-based violence. And then I think I would also love to make this known that, hey, the conversation on gender-based violence or ending gender-based violence or gender violence shouldn't have started within these 16 days from 25th of November. This is an international civil society, you know, campaign. And so we started it way before, you know, at the start of the year, and we'll end it 31st of December and continue from there. So this should be a daily topic for us to talk about. Yeah. Okay. So let's take it upon ourselves.
All right. And finally,
Well, my message really is to the girls out there. Please don't fear speaking out. Speak out. And to the women who are in marriages, when things fail to work out, please get out. You know, I've had people say, no, 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 you're breaking marriages. For crying out loud, if you keep in that marriage and you're killed at the end of the day, it will be your children to suffer. It will be your family to suffer. So when things are not moving well, please get out first, you know, because you cannot afford to continue losing girls. You cannot afford to continue losing women simply because society thinks, you know, if you're a woman, then you're not supposed to get out of marriage. Okay. And like I've told you, there's nothing as women that we have got on a silver plate. We need to get out of our comfort zones and we need to continue fighting this fight. It's not about to end.
Thank you so much, dear ladies, for contributing to this conversation. At the end of the day, it's not a conversation of one group, it's a conversation of all must come to the table and understand that we are all human beings at the end of the day, and we deserve the right to enjoy the most basic human rights, and those should not be privileged or awarded to women and then some awarded to men, but they should be awarded to all, and that perhaps will create a gender-based violence-free society one day. Bring us to the closure of this conversation. Thank you so much for having been with us. We're going to be taking note later on, screening what's happening in the Uganda Medical Association. Stay with us.